What if the United States is unknowingly following the exact same path that destroyed three global superpowers before it? It sounds impossible, almost unthinkable, but history has a way of repeating itself in the most brutal ways. Imagine a pattern so precise, so consistent, that it's almost as if every empire is reading from the same doomed script. Spain, Britain, the Soviet Union, each one believed they were different, that the rules of decline didn't apply to them. Each one was wrong. The story always begins at the height of power. Spain, flush with gold and silver from the New World, believed its wealth would last forever. Britain, with its empire stretching across the globe, thought its dominance was permanent. The Soviet Union, armed with nuclear weapons and unmatched military might, was certain it would outlast the West. But beneath the surface, the seeds of collapse were already taking root. The first sign is always military overreach. These empires stretched themselves thin, fighting wars on multiple fronts, building bases in distant lands, and making promises they couldn't keep. The cost was staggering, but the leaders always found a way to justify it. When the money ran short, they turned to the next stage, currency debasement. Spain mixed copper into its silver coins. Britain abandoned the gold standard, and the Soviet Union printed rubles no one trusted. The value of their money plummeted, and inflation soared. Debt spiraled out of control. Borrowing became the norm, not the exception. Each empire promised reforms, but the spending never stopped. Productive industries withered as easy money and imports replaced real innovation and manufacturing. Why build or create when you can simply buy? The best and brightest left for greener pastures, and the heart of the empire hollowed out. Social decay followed. Crime surged, trust in institutions collapsed, and the population grew restless. The world watched as these giants stumbled. But the final blow always came faster than anyone expected. The reserve currency lost its status, allies drifted away, and suddenly collapse wasn't a distant threat. It was reality. Now look at the United States today. The signs are eerily familiar. Over 750 military bases in 80 countries, a defense budget larger than the next 10 nations combined, and commitments that stretch from Europe to Asia. The national debt has soared past $36 trillion, with interest payments alone rivaling the entire defense budget. The dollar, once as good as gold, is now just paper, printed in the trillions since 2020. Manufacturing has been gutted, with factories shipped overseas and supply chains dependent on foreign rivals. Social trust is at an all-time low. Political polarization is at a breaking point, and the best minds are either leaving or checking out. Meanwhile, rumors swirl about the future of the dollar. BRICS nations are openly discussing alternatives. Saudi Arabia is accepting yuan for oil, and central banks are stockpiling gold. Economists warn that the next debt crisis could be the tipping point, and debates rage about whether America faces a slow decline or a sudden collapse. But history suggests that when the end comes, it's not gradual, it's a rapid unraveling. Confidence vanishes overnight, and what seemed unthinkable becomes inevitable. The lesson is as clear as it is uncomfortable. No empire is immune, and the pattern doesn't care about exceptionalism. The seven-stage pattern of collapse throughout history. The collapse of great empires has followed a chillingly predictable pattern, a seven-stage sequence that repeats itself with almost mathematical precision. It's not just a theory. It's a cycle that's played out in the real world time and time again. Spain, once the richest empire on Earth, Britain, the ruler of a quarter of the globe, and the Soviet Union, a nuclear superpower, all fell victim to the same series of self-inflicted wounds. The first stage is always military overreach, as empires stretch their forces across continents, convinced that their power is limitless. Next comes currency debasement, when leaders try to paper over their problems by diluting the value of their money, hoping no one will notice the cracks forming beneath the surface. The third stage is the debt spiral, as borrowing becomes a way of life and interest payments start to consume the nation's resources. Then comes the loss of productive capacity, when innovation and manufacturing are replaced by easy imports and financial tricks, hollowing out the real economy. Social decay follows, as trust in institutions collapses, crime rises, and the best minds look for a way out. The sixth stage is the loss of reserve currency status, when the world starts to move away from the empire's money, and the advantages that once seemed permanent begin to vanish. Finally, the seventh stage is sudden collapse, a rapid, brutal unraveling that leaves the former superpower a shadow of its former self. What's truly alarming is that the United States has already checked off most of these boxes. The signs are everywhere, from endless military commitments and a ballooning national debt to a society that feels more fractured by the day. The pattern isn't just a warning from the past, it's a roadmap for the present, and America is already deep into the sequence. Spain. The first global superpower to fall. Spain's story is the original blueprint for how a superpower can destroy itself from within, even while it seems untouchable on the world stage. In the 1500s, Spain was the envy of every nation, flush with unimaginable wealth from the gold and silver pouring in from the Americas. Spanish galleons carried hundreds of tons of precious metal across the Atlantic every year, making Spain the financial center of Europe and turning its currency into the global standard. With this easy money, Spain's rulers believed there was nothing they couldn't buy, conquer, or control. King Philip II, sitting atop mountains of treasure, launched military campaigns on 4 continents, fighting wars against the Ottomans, the French, the English, and rebels in the Netherlands all at the same time. The empire's reach seemed limitless, but the costs were staggering. Half of Spain's revenue vanished into the military machine, and still, it was never enough. When the bills piled up, the Spanish crown turned to the oldest trick in the book, debasing the currency. They started mixing copper into their silver coins, hoping no one would notice. At first, the coins looked the same, but their real value plummeted. Merchants stopped accepting them at face value, and inflation exploded. The more Spain tried to fix its problems by creating money out of thin air, the faster the economy unraveled. But the real danger of easy money wasn't just inflation, it was complacency. Why bother building ships or growing food when you can simply buy them with silver? Why innovate or work when you can live off the empire's endless wealth? The Spanish nobility saw labor as beneath them, and the country's productive industries withered. Manufacturing declined, agriculture stagnated, and the best minds left for places where their talents were valued. All the gold and silver that made Spain rich flowed right back out to pay for foreign goods, leaving the country hollowed out and dependent on imports. When the mines in the Americas began to run dry, Spain's entire system collapsed almost overnight. Crime soared, beggars filled the streets, and the empire lost its richest territories. What was once the world's most powerful nation became a shell, still large on paper but irrelevant in reality. Spain's fall wasn't caused by invasion or defeat on the battlefield. It was the result of believing that endless wealth could solve any problem, and that military might could stretch forever without consequences. The lesson is as clear now as it was then. Easy money and unchecked ambition are a deadly combination, and even the greatest empires can crumble when they forget that real strength comes from within. Britain. The empire that lost everything. Britain's story is a stark reminder that even the most powerful empires can unravel with shocking speed. At its peak, Britain's influence stretched across a quarter of the globe, and the pound sterling was the world's reserve currency, trusted by every major bank and government. London was the financial heart of the world, and British leaders believed their dominance was unshakable. But beneath the surface, the empire was already sowing the seeds of its own decline. The cost of defending far-flung colonies and maintaining a global military presence drained the nation's resources. When World War I erupted, Britain faced a choice: stay out and risk losing influence, or jump in and risk everything. They chose to fight, and the price was staggering. The war left Britain buried in debt, forced to borrow billions from the United States just to keep the empire afloat. After the war, they tried to restore the pound's value by returning to the gold standard, but the economy couldn't support it. Exports collapsed, unemployment soared, and the government was forced to abandon the gold standard, causing the pound to lose a quarter of its value overnight. The illusion of financial strength was shattered. Then came World War II, piling on even more debt and further weakening Britain's grip on its empire. By the late 1940s, the country could no longer afford to hold on to its colonies. India, the crown jewel, was the first to go, followed by territories across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean. Within a single generation, The empire that had once seemed permanent was reduced to a handful of islands and memories of past glory. The pound, once the backbone of global finance, became just another regional currency. Britain tried to maintain the appearance of power, clinging to its seat on the UN Security Council and its special relationship with America, but the world knew the truth. The empire was gone and it never came back. The Soviet Union, collapse without a war. The collapse of the Soviet Union is one of the most dramatic examples of how even the most formidable superpowers can vanish almost overnight, not from war or invasion, but from the weight of their own unsustainable choices. For decades, the USSR projected an image of unstoppable strength, matching the United States in nuclear weapons, military technology, and global influence. But behind the scenes, the Soviet economy was crumbling. The government poured up to a fifth of its entire GDP into the military, desperately trying to keep pace with American advancements and maintain control over a vast network of satellite states. This relentless spending drained resources from every other part of society. Factories churned out low-quality goods, farms failed to feed the population, and innovation ground to a halt under the suffocating grip of central planning. The ruble, the Soviet currency, was a fiction, worthless outside the USSR and distrusted even by its own citizens, who turned to dollars and gold whenever they could. As oil prices fell in the 1980s, the government's last real sources of hard currency dried up, and the cracks widened. In a matter of months, the world watched as the Berlin Wall fell. Eastern European countries broke away, and the Soviet grip on its empire evaporated. The final collapse came with stunning speed. In just 900 days, the Soviet Union went from superpower to non-existence. The military, once the pride of the nation, couldn't be paid. The government simply stopped functioning. 30,000 nuclear weapons suddenly belonged to a country that no longer existed. The world was left in shock, realizing that a regime which had seemed unbreakable could dissolve so quickly, not with a bang, but with a silent economic implosion. The U.S. today, walking the same road, look closely at the United States today, and the echoes of past empires are impossible to ignore. The signs are everywhere, hiding in plain sight, as if the country is determined to walk the same road that led Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union to ruin. America's military footprint is massive, with over 750 bases in 80 countries and commitments that stretch from Europe to Asia and the Middle East. The defense budget dwarfs that of any other nation, yet the strain is showing. Aging equipment, recruitment shortfalls, and the growing realization that the U.S. can't respond to every crisis at once. Meanwhile, the dollar, once as good as gold, is now just paper, its value eroded by years of relentless money printing. Since 2000, the money supply has exploded, and since 2020, trillions more have been created out of thin air. The result is a currency that has lost nearly all its purchasing power since the gold standard was abandoned, and inflation that eats away at the savings of ordinary Americans. Debt is spiraling out of control, with the national total soaring past $36 trillion and interest payments alone threatening to surpass even the defense budget. Every year, the government borrows more just to pay the interest on what it already owes, a classic debt spiral that economists warn is unsustainable. The debt ceiling crisis has become a recurring spectacle, with politicians and experts alike warning that the next standoff could trigger a financial meltdown. At the same time, America's manufacturing base has been hollowed out. Decades of offshoring have left the country dependent on foreign supply chains for everything from medicine to electronics to military components. The debate over reshoring and bringing jobs back home is louder than ever, but the reality is that rebuilding lost industries is a slow, uphill battle. The trade deficit continues to grow, and the country imports far more than it exports, just as Spain once did when it relied on silver instead of real production. Social decay is becoming harder to ignore. Trust in institutions is at historic lows. Political polarization is tearing the country apart, and social unrest is on the rise. Homelessness and crime are surging in major cities, and the opioid crisis claims tens of thousands of lives every year. The best and brightest are either leaving for opportunities abroad or checking out entirely, fueling a modern brain drain that weakens the country's future prospects. Recent controversies only add fuel to the fire. The rise of BRICS nations and new oil deals with Saudi Arabia threaten the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency. Central banks around the globe are buying gold and exploring alternatives, while China and Russia conduct trade in their own currencies. The cracks in the dollar's dominance are starting to show, and the consequences could be severe if confidence in the greenback collapses. Top economists warn that the U.S. is running out of time to fix its finances, and the next crisis could be the one that tips the country over the edge. The debate rages on. Will America face a slow, grinding decline, or will the end come suddenly, as it did for the Soviet Union? The uncomfortable truth is that the pattern is already in motion, and the country is further down the road than most people want to admit. The final stages. Is collapse inevitable? The early warning signs that the U.S. dollar's dominance is slipping are no longer just whispers among economists. They're making headlines around the world. Central banks are quietly reducing their dollar reserves and buying up gold at record rates. Major oil producers like Saudi Arabia are now willing to accept other currencies for their exports, and the BRICS nations are openly discussing alternatives to the dollar for international trade. China and Russia have already started settling deals in their own currencies, and even longtime U.S. allies are hedging their bets. These shifts might seem small at first, but history shows that once confidence in a reserve currency begins to erode, the process can accelerate with shocking speed. For Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union, the loss of financial dominance was the final domino that set off a rapid and irreversible collapse. Suddenly, the advantages that once seemed permanent, cheap borrowing, global influence, and the ability to project power, vanished almost overnight. The world moved on, and the former superpower was left scrambling to adjust to a new reality. Today, the United States is seeing the same cracks form. The dollar's unique status has allowed America to live beyond its means for decades, but as more countries look for alternatives, the risk of a sudden shift grows. If the world stops needing dollars, trillions could come flooding back home, triggering inflation, a debt crisis, and a loss of global influence all at once. The question now is whether America can break the cycle that has doomed every empire before it. Is the U.S. truly different, or are we about to become the next cautionary tale?